So Spider-Man 3 already has a lot going on at once, but imagine that multiplied by 2,000. The previous Spider-Man movies had their own separate games, and this one is no different. On May 4th, 2007, the Spider-Man 3 movie and video game swung its way into theaters and GameStops. Now for me personally, I enjoyed the Spider-Man 3 movie. It didn't take itself too serious, and it tried something different by having more than one main villain. However, that right there was the biggest downfall of the video game. It felt like it had to overcompensate because there were more villains, but it ended up just watering down what actually happened in the movie. Let's take a closer look at how this all went wrong.
Who are you?
I don't know.
Now for this video, I want to make it clear that I'm talking about the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC version of Spider-Man 3. It was also released on PS2, PSP, Wii, Nintendo DS, and Game Boy Advance. But those were completely different versions of the game. The next gen edition that we're going to be talking about of Spider-Man 3 was developed by Treyarch and Beenox for the PC port of it, and then it was published by Activision altogether. Right off the rip, this game returns to the open world setting of Manhattan, New York, and this time around the mission structure is non-linear. You no longer have to go around collecting hero points or earning hero points to get to the next chapter of the game or even to get upgrades. You can just simply play the missions in whatever order you feel like until you get to a key point of the story. And basically with this new GTA-like system, this was the start of my confusion. In this game you obviously have Venom, Sandman, and Green Goblin, right? But then you also have more villains that weren't in the movie. And this is pretty normal because it gives you something to look forward to other than what you already know is going to happen. And unfortunately, you have almost too much to look forward to. There are about 9 other villains you run into in this game that have their own storyline and boss fights. You have the Lizard, Scorpion, Rhino, Kraven, the Mad Bomber, Kingpin, the Arsenic Candy Gang leader, the Dragon's Tail Gang leader, and the Apocalypse Gang leader. Out of those 9 that I just said, about 5 of them felt like they could have just been side bosses with their own side storyline. But since they are a part of the main story, it takes away from in-game time that could have been used to build up the story for the main villains. You literally only fight Green Goblin one time, and that's the fight where you send Harry to the hospital with memory loss, and then after that he doesn't pop back up in the game. No cutscenes or nothing until the very end where he has to help Peter save MJ. And I'll talk more about that ending in a minute, but it doesn't include Harry getting his memory back. The fight scene in Harry's house is in this game. There's barely any Peter Parker or cutscene sections you'll see. And you can actually find Harry's house on the map and go inside of it. So I don't know why it was never actually used in the story at all. Then moving on to Sandman, there isn't an actual build up to Peter finding out that he's Uncle Ben's killer. Gwen Stacy isn't in the game at all, so that means they didn't include the first fight in the Brinks truck with Sandman. And thank God they did include the subway fight scene, but even then they didn't sequence it correctly. Right before that fight in the movie, Spider-Man broke Brock's camera, and in the game you'll randomly get your first interaction with Brock after going inside the Daily Bugle building. And in that mission, Brock is trying to get a picture of Spider-Man being evil. And in the movie, we all know he does some Photoshop work and gets caught lying in 4K. But in the game, some McDonald's fed, off-brand looking Spider-Man helps Brock get some pictures for the paper. And this concept was pretty funny, to be honest, but like I said, it was sequenced towards the end, which made that whole storyline not really make sense. What also did make sense to me is that during that subway fight scene with Sandman, they didn't even start it off with any talking or anything. The iconic line from Spider-Man saying, "Remember Ben Parker? The old man you shot down in cold blood?" No, he just got straight to throwing hands with him for no reason. I mean, he had money bags from, I guess, robbing a bank, and he was going into the subway to hide or something, which I don't think that's how that happened in the movie either, but I don't know. Now let's talk about the scene where Brock becomes Venom, because this one is going to be a bit of a nitpick. In the game, it just really isn't as cool as it was in the movie. The symbiote is ragdoll string cheese. That's what it looks like in the game. It even cuts away from him being in the black suit to him being back in his regular suit. The symbiote magically slides off of Spider-Man's back and then down into Venom's mouth. Pause. But fast forwarding to the ending, the way Venom and Sandman team up isn't mutual at all. Sandman doesn't even want to kill Spider-Man, and Venom ends up blackmailing Sandman to work with him by kidnapping his daughter. And I don't even know if you would call it kidnapping, because his daughter is literally hanging on a tree branch right in front of Sandman, and all he would have to do is beef with beef with Venom real quick to save his daughter. But instead, Sandman drops on all fours and does what Venom says.
What do you mean by that?
Spider-Man finds out that Venom and Sandman have held MJ hostage, but in the game, he's in the comfort of his own home when he finds this out, instead of walking on the street and seeing it with a whole bunch of people on TVs. Then he just goes straight to the crime scene instead of asking Harry for help like he did in the movie. And you just start the fight only focusing on Venom. And even in the movie, they were like tag teaming Spider-Man and whooping his ass. But like I said, you're just fighting Venom by yourself. Halfway through the fight though, it cuts back to Harry seeing the news on his TV in his home. And then all of a sudden, you are controlling Green Goblin. This is the first time you control anybody else other than, I guess, Spider-Man, but we'll talk about that in a minute. You hop on the surfboard and fly to the scene with motion controls. I don't know why they thought this was a good idea, but yeah, you have to physically move your controller in this part. But once Harry gets there, he magically has his memory back and knows that Spider-Man is Peter again. And speaking of that, the butler never made an appearance in this game to tell Harry that Peter didn't kill his father. So Green Goblin, Harry, or whatever you want to call him, randomly just pops back up out of nowhere to fight Sandman separately while Spider-Man fights Venom. And the concept of the Sandman boss fight was cool, but the motion controls made it a terrible experience. After Harry finishes fighting Sandman, he goes back up top to help Peter. And as soon as he makes it up there, all Venom does is web Harry up while he is on his board and just throws him to the side. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the last time you see Harry in this game. No confirmation of his death, no mention of him after that moment, just pure confusion. And then to add to it, after you finally take care of Venom by letting him impale himself to death, which also didn't happen in the movie, you go and check up on Mary Jane. And then boom, Sandman pops back up trying to square up with Spider-Man. Then out of nowhere, a police officer brings Sandman his daughter that was stuck up in that tree that Venom put her in. And then guess what? Everything ends happily ever after. But then you remember that Sandman is literally on the run from the police and robbing people for money at that. But a police officer just, brought him his daughter back. Like, there's nothing that you could possibly say that can make that ending right there I just explained make any type of sense. Moving on from the story though, let's talk about the game design real quick. Right off the bat, I have to ask, who made these character models? Because they all look super goofy, especially when you look at the eyes during some of the cutscenes for some of these models. It looks like they on some type of drug. Maybe it was intentional due to how unserious the movie is, but even then the models kind of remind me of like Gary's mod or something like that. The graphics on the other hand definitely got a big upgrade compared to Spider-Man 2 and what that looked like. I guess the extra specs on the next gen hardware helped out a lot, for this game, so that's good. The HUD is also minimalistic, which is positive. The only thing I had a problem with is that you can't really have multiple save files. My game crashed during one of the longest missions in the game, and there was like 3 different boss fights in that mission, and as soon as I finished the last fight, or I guess the first stage of the last fight, bam, my game crashes and I had to restart from the beginning. Other than that, I noticed some like rendering issues throughout the city. I would see like a 2D model with like a green shirt from a distance, but once I got close to it, it turned into a regular 3D model. And it kind of reminded me of the old WWE games or like NBA Jam, when you would look into the crowd and you would just see the nonsense that they had back then. Now the gameplay, I will say there's a good amount of things that I enjoyed from it. Once you get the black suit in this game, which makes you feel unstoppable, The combat is just super satisfying across the board, really. The black suit just amplifies it, and it's a big upgrade from Spider-Man 2's combat in my opinion. In this game, you have like super attacks that you can do once the meter fills up for it, and once you get the black suit, you can actually activate the meter and use it as like a rage mode. And you have like endless combo moves that you can do, and since there aren't really any hero points or anything like that, you just unlock upgrades from playing the game normally, which is a nice quality of life change. The only negatives I can say about the combat is that when you're on top of a car trying to fight, it isn't as smooth as how it was in Spider-Man 2, and there isn't a lock on camera either in this game, which I truly don't understand, because when you play as Green Goblin during the ending, you can lock on. And it makes no sense why they wouldn't put that feature while you're playing as Spider-Man, especially since it was in Spider-Man 1 and 2. And speaking of that, the bad camera angles from Spider-Man 1 has returned in this game. Boy oh boy, the camera has a mind of its own. They also have the Liu Kang bicycle kick in this game for some reason, which is 100% one of my favorite moves to do. Just some of the combos you can put together is just crazy. The web swinging is solid, but it isn't as smooth as Spider-Man 2. The web zip does feel more fast-paced though, which I do like, and I also feel like you could do more air tricks in Spider-Man 2 compared to this game. The animations though, when you are swinging around, do look kind of weird. Oh yeah, and then whenever you're crawling on a wall, it's always super difficult to jump off of that wall. It's like you're glued to the wall, and it just ends up being annoying sometimes. There was a stealth mission, but luckily it wasn't that strict at all. If you got caught, it wasn't that much of a big deal, and I'm so glad they did it this way, because the bad camera angles make it almost impossible to stay hidden during this mission. You can honestly run past a lot of the enemies until the game forces you to fight, and that was not the case during the Spider-Man 1 stealth mission, which I still think is the worst mission I've played in a Spider-Man game so far. Those robots in that mission are built different compared to the ones that are in this Spider-Man 3 mission. This game also has a crazy obsession with QuickTime events, and there are probably more QuickTime events in Spider-Man 3 than any game that I've played in recent memory. A good amount of them are pretty unnecessary in my opinion, but some of them are, perfectly fitting in that situation. The worst one though, in my opinion, is when you're fighting or you're finishing up the fight with Sandman. You have to perfectly time this sequence after finishing this fight, and since the boss fight is already annoying because of the motion controls, you'll most likely have low health before you get to the QTE part of it, and if you fail to QTE too many times, you have to redo the entire boss fight over again. It was just such a painful section of the ending. Speaking of boss fights, like I said, there are plenty of them. Most of them are either okay, bad, or just straight up underwhelming. I'm not going to go into detail of every single boss fight, but my favorites were Scorpion, Rhino, Kraven, and then the first Sandman boss fight. Before you fight Scorpion for the first time, you play a mini arcade game using him as the playable character, and just the whole section of that mission, breaking him out of that building that he's in, chasing him in traffic with actual well-placed QuickTime events, fighting him on top of a bridge and using his own tail to deactivate these generators. It was just an epic sequence of events in my opinion. And then the Rhino fight was also crazy because he was ripping down pillars from out the ceiling and trying to hit you with the pillar. He's spinning around and doing crazy stuff like that, chasing you down and stuff. Scorpion also helps you out in that fight, but he doesn't really do any damage until you both grab onto Rhino. It definitely kept you on your toes though, so I thought it was pretty fun. And then the first two times you fight Kraven were intense because the first one he kept changing forms, and that kind of reminded me of Udyr. If you guys play League of Legends, you know Udyr. And then the second fight, that man starts going invisible and you have to use the detective mode feature to find him while there are lizards attacking you at the same time. The third fight though is where I started to hate this entire section because he combines with the lizard. Kraven combines with lizard, and it was just super annoying because you had to destroy 4 generators in this room by throwing the lizard into them after you actually got a hold of them, and it was difficult to control where you actually threw them, so it was hard to aim at the generator and break it. But once I finally destroyed all of them, that's when my game crashed. So I had to redo all of the fights. Remember, the 2 Kraven fights, that was a part of that same mission. So I had to redo all of those fights when my game crashed just to get back to the lizard and find out after I did that section again, there was another stage of that boss fight. I don't know why that mission was so long. I felt like I was playing Elden Ring or something at that point with all of those multiple stages of fighting. And then finally, the first Sandman fight was cool because you can scrape his face on the train like they did in the movie. And this was the first time you use your black suit, so you really saw like the, I guess, power of it there. So that was nice. Just to put it in perspective, that is 4 out of the 12 villains that you fight that were actually great. The Mad Bomber was interesting at first, especially with all the chaos that he was causing in the city, but it's just the way they built it up just to end with you fighting him by throwing back helicopter missiles. It was just kind of disappointing. I felt like he was going to play a bigger role in the entire game because he was the first person that you saw at the start, and all of his missions were like action packed, but it was just the last one that didn't make any sense. Once you take down the helicopter by throwing back all those missiles, he ends up still being alive and he just disappears from the game after that. So that just kind of ruled out the Mad Bomber for me. And then the Lizard, aka, Dr. Connors, he had a decent storyline, but like I said, the boss fight where he and Kraven like merged together, that was annoying and it crashed my game, so I just got pissed and just knocked him out of the game altogether. There were a good amount of bomb defusal puzzles, which I didn't really mind. It was just more of a thing that kept you on your toes, just like the quick time events. And overall, I feel like there should have been tutorials in this game. A lot of the time, you have to figure something out by doing it for the first time on the fly. And then on top of that, it doesn't do a good job explaining what you're supposed to do in this game or where you're supposed to go in certain situations. You just kind of have to guess or do some trial and error before you find out. And a good example of that would be pretty much anytime you're doing a mission for the Lizard. And that's another reason I didn't like that man. I got stuck on this one section where you had to avoid the water because of electricity. And all you had to do was climb on the ceiling. All you had to do was follow the train and web down to like a power switch in the electric water to turn it off. And it wasn't clear because I never really had to web down to something or interact with it until that point in the game. And then another example I would have for the Lizard is that during one of the boss fights, you have to stand in the middle of a conveyor belt and perfectly dodge to get like a button mashing prompt. And if you don't stand in the middle of that conveyor belt, you won't have enough time to let the full sequence play out, and you'll actually take damage for messing it up. But after you end up finishing the main story, you can replay the entire game as Black Suit Spider-Man, which is dope. There are side missions for the Daily Bugle which were worth it to finish, in my opinion. It wasn't just like taking a bunch of random pictures and bringing it back to Robbie. There was like a storyline for each mission, which was cool. And there were thrill ride missions for Mary Jane, and man, I felt like those right there, the thrill ride missions, were pointless. She basically just asks you to take her to a destination, but you have to do certain things while you're going to this destination, like go fast, swing high, swing low, while collecting enough hearts in time to finish the mission. Speaking of collecting, you can collect different types of secret tokens just like you could in Spider-Man 2, and you can keep track of how many of these tokens you've collected in the pause menu as well as other stats in game, which I thought was pretty dope. There are 4 different types of activities you can do in the game, which are races, skydiving, bomb tours, and combat tours. They brought back the random crime fighting activities from Spider-Man 2, but there aren't that many variations of them, and I don't think they really pop up as much as they did in Spider-Man 2. The endurance and timed arenas also make a return in this game, but there aren't any like secret boss fights in them that you can find. Another thing I noticed is that there are no cheat codes that you can use. There isn't a main menu or a way you can name your save file. It says there are cheat codes for this game on the internet, but I think someone just posted that as a troll. I tried them and pretty much nothing happened. Cheat codes slowly got taken away in these Spider-Man games, from the first one having a lot of them to this one having none that I know of. Last but not least, you guys know we had to talk about the audio in this game. One thing I noticed during the combat is that it really didn't have those distinct sound effects that the punches in Spider-Man 2 had. It really isn't like a big deal, but that's one of the things that I love from Spider-Man 2 that I noticed right away. Other than that though, everything else is really positive. The soundtrack is super fire as always. They give you more audio slider options to mess around with compared to Spider-Man 2, which I liked. And they finally got JK to voice act Jameson in this game. Most of the movies, like, main actors were voice acting for this game, which is, you know, what made it that much better. All in all, I would say that Spider-Man 3 lacked direction, and there was just too much going on and not much of it made sense. It was still a funny game to play, and I would still recommend you to play it if you are a Spider-Man fan at the end of the day. I would just say try not to take it serious at all, just kind of like the movie, but in terms of being a movie licensed video game, it just didn't live up to the movie well at all. And as a video game, it is okay at best. But yeah, that's gonna wrap up the video for me. Let me know what you guys think about Spider-Man 3 in the comments. Drop a like if you guys did enjoy the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And without further ado, I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.